Zainab had everything a woman could dream of: wealth, influence, and a flourishing business empire. As the CEO of a successful real estate firm in Lagos, she had built her fortune with determination and intelligence. Her name carried respect in elite circles, and her lavish lifestyle was a testament to years of hard work. Yet, beneath the luxury and confidence, there was a woman who longed for something money could not buy: genuine love. Enter Jabari. Tall, smooth-talking, and irresistibly charming, he appeared in her life like a breath of fresh air. They met at an exclusive business gala in Nairobi, where his effortless wit and confidence intrigued her. He introduced himself as an entrepreneur with ambitious dreams, claiming he was working on groundbreaking projects across Africa. His presence was magnetic, his words persuasive, and his interest in her felt sincere. Zainab, cautious by nature, found herself drawn to him in a way she hadn't experienced before. He wasn't intimidated by her success like most men were. Instead, he seemed to admire her intelligence and drive. Jabari showered her with attention, making her feel seen beyond her wealth and status. He listened intently when she spoke about her struggles and dreams, always knowing the right thing to say. What she didn't know was that Jabari had carefully crafted every moment of their encounter. He had done his research. He knew who she was before they met, understood her weaknesses, and saw an opportunity. Beneath the romantic gestures and adoring glances, he was a man with a plan, a man who wanted access to her wealth and influence. The days turned into weeks, and Zainab found herself letting her guard down. Jabari made her believe in love again, making her feel like a woman first and a business mogul second. He played the role of the perfect partner effortlessly, always showing up when she needed him, always speaking of a future together. Trust, once a fortress she had built around herself, started to crumble brick by brick. What began as cautious admiration soon became deep affection. The idea of having a partner who understood her, supported her, and saw her beyond her success was intoxicating. But what Zainab didn't realize was that she wasn't falling in love. She was walking into a carefully laid trap. Jabari knew exactly what he was doing. From the moment he met Zainab, he played his role to perfection, weaving an illusion of love and sincerity. His words were carefully chosen, his gestures timed flawlessly. He painted himself as a man with big dreams but limited means, a visionary entrepreneur whose only obstacle was the lack of financial backing. At first, Zainab admired his ambition. She had always respected hard work, and Jabari's stories of struggle resonated with her. He spoke of wanting to revolutionize the African business landscape, of projects that could uplift communities if only he had the right resources. He wasn't like the men she had met before, those who either envied her success or sought to control her. Instead, he appeared to celebrate her achievements, often saying, "I love how powerful you are. It inspires me to be better." His admiration felt genuine. He didn't ask for anything, at least not directly. Instead, he spoke of his struggles with such passion that Zainab found herself offering to help before he even had to ask. It started with small things: a loan to cover a delayed business payment, an investment in what he described as a promising venture. His reluctance to accept money made him seem even more trustworthy. "I hate taking money from you," he would say with a heavy sigh, "but I promise this is temporary. Once my deals go through, I'll pay you back tenfold." Zainab, kind-hearted and generous, never hesitated. She saw herself in him, the same hunger for success, the same belief in creating opportunities. If money was all that stood between him and his dreams, why wouldn't she help? After all, she had the means, and what was wealth if not a tool to uplift those she cared about? Jabari made sure to balance his requests with grand romantic gestures. He would surprise her with handwritten letters, take her on spontaneous weekend getaways, and cook her dinner after a long day. Every time she gave him money, he followed it with an act of devotion that made her believe their relationship was built on more than finances. Her friends noticed the pattern before she did. "Zainab, are you sure about this?" her closest friend, Amina, asked one evening over dinner. "You've known him for only a few months and you've already given him so much." Zainab waved off the concern. "It's not about the money, Amina. He's a good man. He's just in a tough spot right now." Amina wasn't convinced. "And what if he's using you?" Zainab laughed. "You don't know him like I do." But in truth, she didn't know him either. Not the real Jabari. She only knew the version he wanted her to see. The version who loved her, who needed her, who made her believe she was his partner in both love and success. The deception was seamless, and Zainab, blinded by affection, walked willingly into his trap. It started subtly. At first, Jabari never directly asked for money. He would casually mention a delayed payment or a deal that was just within reach, if only he had a little more capital. Zainab, eager to see him succeed, would offer to help before he even had to ask. "Just let me know what you need," she would say, and he would hesitate, just long enough to make it seem like he was reluctant to take her money. Then, with a grateful sigh, he would accept. Soon the amounts grew. What began as small contributions to help him stay afloat turned into larger investments in his so-called business ventures. He convinced her that he had a promising startup on the verge of taking off, but without immediate funding, it would collapse. "This is just temporary, my love," he reassured her. "Once things stabilize, you'll see how big this will be." Zainab believed in him. After all, she had built her own empire from the ground up. She understood the struggles of entrepreneurship and saw his situation as just another obstacle to overcome. She transferred money without hesitation, covering his rent, his travel expenses, even his business meetings in luxurious hotels. Her closest friends grew suspicious. Amina, never one to hold back, confronted her one evening. "Zainab, this is getting out of hand. You're funding his entire life." Zainab scoffed. "It's not like that. He just needs a little help." "Help? Zai, he's living off you. Every time we go out, he never pays. Every new business deal he mentions always needs more money. Doesn't that seem odd to you?" But Zainab was too invested to listen. She had already given so much, financially and emotionally. The idea that she might be getting used was too painful to accept. Instead, she doubled down, convincing herself that love required sacrifice. Even her family voiced concerns. Her brother Idris had heard about Jabari's growing dependence on her and decided to step in. "Zainab, men like him. I've seen this before. They take and take until there's nothing left. Be careful." She rolled her eyes. "You don't know him, Idris. He's not like that." But deep down, a small voice inside her was beginning to whisper doubts. She silenced it quickly, telling herself that Jabari was simply going through a rough patch. After all, love meant believing in your partner, even when things got tough. What she didn't realize was that she wasn't supporting a struggling businessman. She was funding a con artist who knew exactly how to keep her hooked. At first, the cracks were small, barely noticeable. A forgotten detail here, a slightly altered version of a past event there. Jabari's stories, which once flowed so effortlessly, started to show inconsistencies. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of her penthouse, Jabari spoke about a meeting he had in Cape Town the previous week. He described how his potential investors were impressed by his pitch and how close he was to securing funding. But something felt off. Just a few days before, he had mentioned being in Nairobi for business during that same time frame. Zainab frowned. "I thought you were in Nairobi last week." Jabari barely hesitated. "I was, babe. I had to make a quick trip to Cape Town for a last-minute opportunity. It was all so sudden." He smiled, brushing a hand over hers. "You know how these business deals work." His explanation sounded reasonable enough, but a seed of doubt had been planted. Then there were the phone calls, long ones that he always took in private. He would step out onto the balcony or leave the room, his voice hushed, his tone urgent. When she asked about them, he dismissed her concerns. "Just business, my love. You know how stressful this life can be. But it wasn't just business. One afternoon, while using his laptop to check an email, a message notification popped up on the screen. It was from a woman named Aisha. "Can't wait to see you tonight, babe." Zainab's stomach clenched. Her heart pounded in her ears as she stared at the message. For a moment, she convinced herself it was a misunderstanding. Maybe it was an old message. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. But the more she paid attention, the more she saw the truth unravel before her. Jabari had a pattern. He was frequently traveling for business, but always seemed to have just enough time to enjoy lavish dinners and weekends away, without her. When she pressed him for details, he would either brush her off or shower her with affection to distract her. One evening, Amina decided she had seen enough. She pulled Zainab aside and showed her screenshots from social media. Jabari had been spotted at a luxury resort in Zanzibar with another woman, his arm wrapped possessively around her waist. The caption on the post read, "My king spoils me again." Zainab's hands shook as she scrolled through the images. The woman, stunning and confident, was not just a random fling. She was someone Jabari had clearly been seeing for a while. When confronted, Jabari did what he did best. He lied. "Zainab, it's not what you think. She's just a business associate. You know how people love to start rumors." But this time Zainab wasn't buying it. The evidence was overwhelming, and the truth was clear. Jabari had been using her, not just for money but for access, luxury, and convenience. Everything she thought she knew about him was a lie. And for the first time since meeting him, she realized she had made a terrible mistake. The betrayal, though already evident, needed a final confirmation. Zainab could no longer ignore the uneasy feeling in her chest, the mounting evidence, or the whispers of doubt that had grown louder with each passing day. She decided she had to see it for herself. One evening, Jabari told her he had an urgent business meeting out of town. His voice was casual, his face unreadable, as he kissed her forehead and promised to call later. But Zainab had already seen the messages, flirtatious texts between him and another woman named Nia, setting up a private dinner at a high-end hotel. She didn't cry, she didn't argue. Instead, she called Amina, and together they drove to the hotel. Sitting in a discreet corner of the restaurant, she spotted him almost immediately. Jabari, dressed in his usual designer suit, sat at an intimate table for two. Across from him was Nia, stunning and laughing softly as he poured her a glass of wine. He leaned in close, his fingers grazing hers in the way he used to do with Zainab. The sight hit her like a dagger to the chest, but she didn't look away. She watched as he whispered something into Nia's ear, the same sweet words he had once told her. It was as if their entire relationship had been nothing more than a rehearsed act, one he had played with many before. Steeling herself, Zainab stood and walked straight toward them. Jabari looked up just as she reached the table, his face shifting from surprise to an uneasy smile. "Zai, what are you doing here?" Nia turned to her, confused, sensing the tension. Zainab folded her arms. "That's what I should be asking you, babe. Is this your business meeting?" Jabari barely missed a beat. He laughed, shaking his head. "Come on, Zainab. Don't be dramatic. Nia is just a friend. We were discussing a potential collaboration." Nia, looking between them, frowned. "Wait, what's going on?" Zainab didn't take her eyes off Jabari. "Go ahead. Tell her. Tell her how you've been living off my money while pretending to love me. Tell her how you've been feeding me the same lies you're feeding her." Jabari's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly. "You're overreacting. You always do this, jumping to conclusions. Honestly, Zainab, I think you need to calm down." The gaslighting was infuriating. She had seen enough and she wasn't about to let him manipulate her any longer. For the first time since falling for him, she felt no love, no sadness, only rage. But rage alone wasn't enough. She needed a plan, a real one. Jabari thought he could play her, thought he had control. But he had underestimated her. He had betrayed the wrong woman, and soon he would realize just how much of a mistake that was. Zainab refused to let the heartbreak consume her. She had spent months, maybe years, believing in a lie, pouring her love, trust, and wealth into a man who saw her as nothing more than an opportunity. But if Jabari thought she would walk away defeated, he was wrong. She took a deep breath and made a decision. She would play the long game. He had built his deception on trust, and now she would use that same trust to bring him down. The first step was control. She cut off his access to her money without making it obvious. Instead of directly refusing his requests, she gave vague responses. "Business has been slow," she'd say, or "I'm waiting on a major deal to go through." She let him believe she was still under his spell while slowly distancing herself. Jabari, unaware of the storm brewing, continued his game. He sweet-talked her, called her his queen, and made grand promises about their future. But Zainab was no longer listening with her heart, only her mind. The second step was gathering evidence. With Amina's help, she started digging. She went through bank statements, tracking every transfer she had made to Jabari. She collected screenshots of messages from other women who, after hearing her story, came forward with similar experiences. She even hired a private investigator who confirmed her worst fears. Jabari had been running the same scam on multiple women. Each time he played the struggling entrepreneur, drained them financially, and moved on once they had nothing left to give. But this time, he had chosen the wrong woman. With all the evidence in place, Zainab moved to the final step, the trap. She knew Jabari's greed would be his downfall, so she dangled one last irresistible opportunity before him. One evening over dinner, she leaned in and whispered, "I just secured a $2 million investment deal. The investor is looking for a tech company to partner with. I thought of you." Jabari's eyes lit up. "Are you serious?" She nodded, pretending to be excited. "It's a private deal. They want to invest quietly, so everything has to be handled carefully." Jabari took the bait. Over the next few weeks, he played his part perfectly, presenting himself as the perfect business partner. He even created fake financial statements to impress the supposed investor, a move that would soon expose him. What he didn't know was that the entire deal was a setup. The investor was actually working with Zainab, gathering proof of Jabari's fraudulent activities. And when he tried to withdraw the investment funds, money he thought he was stealing, he was instead met with legal charges. The moment the authorities stepped in, Jabari's world crumbled. The evidence Zainab had gathered, his scams, the financial fraud, the manipulation, was airtight. As he was taken away in handcuffs, he looked at Zainab, his mask of confidence shattered. "You set me up," he whispered. She smiled, her voice calm and unwavering. "No, Jabari, you set yourself up." Zainab played her role perfectly. She pretended to be the same trusting, devoted woman Jabari had manipulated for so long. She knew his weaknesses, his greed, his arrogance, and his belief that he was always one step ahead. Now she would use those very traits against him. One evening, she casually mentioned an exclusive investment opportunity over dinner. "I've been speaking with a foreign investor," she said, swirling her wine glass as if deep in thought. "They're looking to partner with a promising tech entrepreneur, someone with vision. I immediately thought of you." Jabari's eyes lit up with interest. "Really? What kind of investment?" Zainab leaned in, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "A major capital injection, $2 million, but the investor wants to keep things discreet, no big banks involved. They need someone they can trust." She placed her hand over his, giving him the look of unwavering belief she used to wear so naturally. "I told them you were the perfect person." Jabari took the bait without hesitation. His mind raced with possibilities. If he played his cards right, he could manipulate this deal and walk away with all the money. He had done it before, convincing people to invest in fake businesses, rerouting funds into offshore accounts, then disappearing before anyone caught on. "What do I need to do?" he asked, barely containing his excitement. Zainab smiled inwardly but kept her expression composed. Just prepare your business documents. The investor wants to see financial reports, proof of revenue, and a projected growth plan. Jabari nodded, already scheming. Of course, he had no real business, but fabricating financial documents was second nature to him. He worked quickly, forging a solid-looking investment proposal and presenting it to Zainab within days. She took the documents and handed them to the investor, a financial expert working with her behind the scenes. Unknown to Jabari, every false claim, every forged signature, and every fabricated number was being documented as evidence of fraud. To seal the trap, Zainab insisted on drafting a formal contract. Just for security, she said sweetly. The investor needs to protect their funds. Jabari barely read the legal papers before signing them. He was too focused on the millions he believed he would soon steal. What he didn't know was that those very documents were designed to incriminate him. The terms outlined strict financial accountability, ensuring that any mismanagement of funds would lead to immediate legal consequences. Jabari thought he was outsmarting Zainab. He thought he was getting away with the ultimate con. But in reality, he was walking straight into his own downfall. Jabari had always considered himself untouchable. He had spent years perfecting his craft, manipulating, deceiving, and exploiting. He thought he was smarter than everyone else, always staying one step ahead. But this time, he had underestimated his target. Zainab waited until the final moment to strike. With all the evidence in place, the forged documents, the fabricated business reports, and the fraudulent contracts, she moved swiftly. First, she leaked the financial records to the police. She sent an anonymous tip detailing how Jabari had engaged in fraudulent activities, faking investments, and stealing money under false pretenses. She provided copies of the documents he had so carelessly signed, showing clear evidence of financial fraud. Then she turned to the media. With the help of Amina and other contacts, she ensured that every major news outlet had access to Jabari's crimes. Business journalists, social influencers, and bloggers picked up the story quickly. Within hours, headlines spread across social media. Businessman Jabari exposed in multi-million fraud scheme. Wealthy entrepreneur or master con artist. The truth about Jabari. Exclusive. Women speak out about Jabari's lies and deception. The reaction was immediate. His former associates distanced themselves, deleting photos and statements linking them to him. Investors who had once praised his vision quickly pulled back, some even taking legal action against him for past deceptions. As the media storm intensified, the authorities acted. Jabari, completely unaware of the growing chaos, was still waiting for the supposed investment funds when the police arrived at his apartment. He was lounging on his couch sipping a glass of whiskey when the knock came. He smirked, assuming it was Zainab with good news about their deal. But as he opened the door, his smirk vanished. The officers stepped in without hesitation. Jabari, you are under arrest for financial fraud, identity theft, and fraudulent misrepresentation. The color drained from his face. Wait, what? This is a mistake. I haven't done anything wrong. But the officers weren't listening. They read him his rights as they handcuffed him, ignoring his frantic protests. He looked around, expecting someone, anyone, to come to his defense, but there was no one left. As he was escorted out of the building, the flashing cameras and reporters waiting outside sealed his fate. Jabari? Is it true that you scammed multiple women? Jabari, what do you have to say about the fraud allegations? Zainab exposed you. Any response? The mention of Zainab's name sent a fresh wave of rage through him. He looked around, and there she was, standing a few feet away, watching everything unfold. For the first time, he saw the woman he had underestimated. Not a lovesick fool, but a force he had never anticipated. She met his gaze, her expression calm, victorious. I told you, she said softly, just loud enough for him to hear. You set yourself up. As he was shoved into the police car, reality crashed down on him. His wealth, his reputation, his carefully constructed empire of lies, it was all gone. The tables had turned, and this time there was no escaping the consequences. As the dust settled, Zainab found herself standing at the edge of a new beginning. The storm that had once threatened to consume her had passed, leaving her stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. She spent weeks reflecting on everything that had happened, the love she had given, the betrayal she had endured, and the revenge she had so carefully executed. There was pain, yes, but also clarity. Jabari had taken her trust for granted, believing she was just another victim, but instead of breaking her, his deception had transformed her into a woman who would never be fooled again. Zainab channeled her energy into rebuilding her life. She refocused on her business, ensuring that her finances were now protected by tighter security and better boundaries. No one, not even the most charming man, would ever have unchecked access to her wealth again. She also took time for herself, traveling, reconnecting with old friends, and rediscovering the parts of her identity she had neglected while caught up in Jabari's lies. But perhaps the most powerful transformation came in her purpose. She realized she wasn't the only woman who had been used and manipulated. There were many others, smart, successful women who had fallen for men like Jabari, and she refused to let them suffer in silence. Zainab began speaking out, sharing her story with women who had been in similar situations. She launched an initiative to educate women on financial abuse, manipulation tactics, and how to spot the warning signs early. Through workshops, mentorship programs, and online discussions, she created a safe space where women could learn to protect themselves, not just emotionally but financially as well. She was no longer a victim, she was a survivor, a fighter, and a protector. One evening as she sat on her balcony watching the city lights, Amina joined her, raising a glass in a toast. "To never being played again," Zainab smiled, clinking her glass. "To knowing our worth." Jabari had thought he was the mastermind, the one in control, but in the end, he had only been a stepping stone in Zainab's journey to something greater. She had turned the pain into power, the betrayal into wisdom, and this time, the victory was entirely hers. Jabari's downfall was swift and absolute. With undeniable evidence against him, the court had no choice but to convict him of financial fraud, identity theft, and multiple counts of deception. He was sentenced to several years in prison, his once charmed life reduced to nothing more than a cautionary tale. The people who once surrounded him, business partners, women he had deceived, and high-profile friends, disappeared overnight. His social status was shattered, and his name became synonymous with greed and betrayal. No amount of smooth talking could save him now. For Zainab, justice had been served. But revenge was never her end goal. Freedom was. And now, she was finally free. With Jabari out of her life, she focused on what truly mattered, herself. She expanded her business, investing in ventures that empowered women financially. Her story became a beacon of strength, inspiring others to recognize their worth and never allow anyone to manipulate them again. Despite everything, she held her head high, moving forward not with bitterness, but with wisdom. She refused to let Jabari's actions define her. Instead, she used them as fuel to build something even greater. One evening, as she stood overlooking the city skyline, she took a deep breath, feeling lighter than she had in years. She had survived, thrived, and reclaimed her power. The story of Zainab and Jabari was no longer one of heartbreak, it was one of triumph. A reminder that no matter how deeply one is deceived, there is always a way to rise again. And most importantly, that self-worth is never for sale.